Good evening and welcome to the GM Academy Workshop. Of course, I am your host, Jim McClure, and I'm looking a little bit different tonight. Bit of a story involved. Of course, today's topic is time travel and discovery. That's time, comma, travel, comma, and discovery, not time travel to discover things. And really what we're going to be talking about is essentially everything involved with moving your party from point A to point B. And there is surprisingly a lot of information involved in that, but that still doesn't explain why I'm wearing this shirt, as opposed to my standard nice looking black. See, the funny story is this workshop is a week late because I was on vacation last week down to Outer Banks, North Carolina, and I sat down there in a chair in a beach house all week, and I was going to do this workshop from a little bit of a nicer setting, and I was going to wear this shirt, and we were going to talk about travel because I had traveled. Well, it turns out there are still houses in the world that don't have internet, so thus we are doing it this week. We don't have the pretty back shirt, but I was going to wear the shirt no matter what. So this is setting for you all, just so you know. Again, of course, the topic today is time, travel, and discovery, and as always, we have a panel of people here on board, and we will get just a couple quick introductions from them, starting with Malik. If you would, go ahead and of course, introduce yourself, how long you've been playing, and why this workshop interests you. We're going to do that question here today. So go ahead, Malik.
All right. So yes, my name is Malik. I've been GMing for a total of 7-8 months in that area, and this workshop interests me because I actually do travel because I have an open world sandbox, and I want to know of different ways I could go about it. Most of my ways tend to be a bit more arbitrary, but yeah, I'd like to see how that process occurs.
Wonderful. Thank you, Malik. Next person, of course, we've got here on the line is Patrick, who Patrick is a newcomer, first time here on the workshops. Patrick, go ahead and give us your introduction there.
Hi, thanks for having me. I've been playing tabletop games for about 7 years now, only DMing for about 2 or 3 of which. This workshop interests me personally because within the types of games I run, I find my players constantly have a lot of traveling, going from point A to point B, from town to town, and I find it plays a major role in RPG campaigns.
Wonderful. Thank you, Patrick. And finally, we have Toast. I've been thinking about Toast all week because, oddly enough, I had a ridiculous amount of toast for breakfast this week. So anyway, let's get an introduction from you.
Alrighty, well, I'm Toast. I've been playing for about 2 years-ish, more or less on and off, GMing on and off about a year and a half, and I am interested in this episode because one of my first experiences playing, I had both good and sort of bad experiences with time travel and discovery, comments included.
Wonderful. All right. Thank you for the panel. We're going to have quite an active discussion here today. That's without question. So I want to preface this entire workshop by saying, I've said this in the past, these are my opinions. Okay? They may sound strong. They may sound very specific. There are multiple ways to GM. I'm going to express to you what I personally find in travel. Not everyone's going to agree with that. So I want to get that out of the way from the get-go of this is what I personally find works best. There are multiple ways to GM, and yeah, that's the warning. So without further ado, let's get into the workshop itself. Time, travel, and discovery. These are the concepts we're here talking about today. Again, everything moving your players from point A to point B and why we do it. Interestingly enough, this is one of the things that took me the longest when I started GMing to really get my head around. It seemed straightforward. I knew what I wanted to do, but it took a lot of dissection on my end to really get into why we do the things we do, how to keep it interesting, how to avoid the things that are uninteresting, and how to handle it properly within the scale and the scope of what you're doing. And it's not nearly as easy as it sounds, especially for the new DMs, and it's a lot of pitfalls people have. So hopefully this will give you some wonderful insight. So we get into our first point, which is what is the purpose of travel? Surprisingly, there is not only one answer to this. Why do we have PCs, groups of PCs, move from one place to another? What is the purpose in that transition? And I kind of break it down to 3. 1, 2, 3 reasons. There's the obvious reasons. Logistically getting them from one setting to another. Seems obvious. They're in town A. The plot says they need to be in town B. Something has to happen when they move from town A to town B. Real simple. Logistically getting them from one place to another. But there are other purposes of travel. One would be reveal and progress the plot itself. So you're actually having travel as an event to progress the plot. The third one is to engage the discovery type of fun. And again, if you haven't seen the Understanding Player Types video, highly encourage you to check that out. We're always talking about the 8 kinds of fun. Discovery is one of the 8. We're going to talk heavily about that tonight. But that is the other purpose of travel, to engage that discovery nature. So anytime you're looking at travel and moving people from point A to point B, you want to look at these 3 different things. And what are you actually trying to do? Are you just trying to move them from point A to point B? Are you trying to, reveal and progress and develop plot from there? Or are you trying to engage the discovery type of fun? Or perhaps doing multiple? With that in mind, we are going to go to our panel here, and I'm going to start with Malik, because I know Malik likes running the campaigns. And Malik, let me just get you, when your players are moving from City A through the woods to City B, explain to me kind of what happens, what you normally do, whether it takes multiple play sessions. Just kind of give me a quick rundown of what you do there, Malik.
Well, to be honest, I personally don't go through the time travel aspect of just saying that they got there. I feel like the game is a journey, so I just have them RP the whole way through, like each and every single day, and I track them on a hex map where I have set days for each time they go, and they can do downtime, roll for an encounter, some type of encounter on an encounter table, and I add an arbitrary flair to both. Say, for example, they roll centaurs on an encounter table. Those centaurs aren't just centaurs anymore. They are special centaurs who love partying and follow more of a Greek philosophy in the way that they socialize. And they have a special magical wine known as Rouffae, if you know what I'm saying. And I've given them more than one encounter to just interact with these centaurs. And I feel like that effectively gives them the opportunity to mess around. And I also give them the option to use downtime rules. But other than that, it's I mostly just let them roam free or just travel there RP-wise.
Okay. Thanks, Malik. Patrick, I'm going to get yours next, but I'm just going to make one quick comment here before we talk to Patrick. We're going to, again, like I said and gave the warning at the beginning, there are different types of DM styles. And honestly, I'm going to talk very specifically about a lot of the things that you mentioned there, Malik, that I am personally not a fan of. There are good ways to do it. There are groups that enjoy it. There are DMs that enjoy it and can do it well. I think there's a lot of pitfalls to be careful of with a lot of the things that you do. And again, not saying you do it wrong, just saying things to be prepared for. So I just sort of wanted to preface that because we're going to talk a lot about what you just said, Malik. But yeah, let's get one of the other DMs. Patrick, what do you do? How do you handle sort of groups moving from point A to point B?
All right. Personally, the first thing I do is when looking at point A to point B, look at the area between where these 2 points are, and look at the terrain specifically, and look like if it's a forest or plains, look at what kind of encounters or events can happen from these environments. And then from that, I like to prepare just a generic list of kind of encounters or events, more so not combat orientated, but role-playing and social that can come from these. And then as they go through the days and role-play them out, when it's appropriate, interject these events into like a linear stream as they go from point A to point B to make the trip feel real.
Okay, all right, and I'm so glad you said the last thing, to make the trip feel real. That's another thing that we're going to discuss in depth, because that is, and I sort of mentioned earlier, that I had a long time to try and get my head around travel, and it was just that concept, making the trip feel like it took enough time, like it felt like, you crossed half the earth to get there, and how specifically to do that, and that's our time part of our title there. But thank you for that, Patrick. So when we get into handling travel in games, the first concept I want you to pay attention to is, what are you trying to accomplish with the travel? Okay? There is multiple things that happen. We talked about the 3 core concepts. Are you merely trying to get them to move from point A to point B? Are you trying to progress the plot with this travel, or are you trying to engage their discovery type of fun? You need to have a clear understanding in your mind what you are trying to do. And the reason being is because if you do not have this clear image, if you do not go into it knowing what you're doing, you go into the concept going, well, we're going to travel from point A to point B, and something has to happen. So let's just make something happen. The sort of stereotypical version is we're going to take a ship from this continent to the next continent. And if I'm a PC in that game, I'm just holding up my sundial and going, when's the Kraken going to attack? A, because it's a trope, but B, because people feel that something needs to happen while we're traveling. And if it's not well thought out, if it's not intentioned, then all it is just something happening. And something happening for the sake of something happening, I don't agree with. I think everything should be to drive your story, to drive your plot, to drive the 8 kinds of fun, the engagement. Understand what you're doing, because if you understand what you're doing, then you can work to achieve it. If you're just throwing something out to throw something out, then you're throwing something out to throw something out. It might work, it might not work. I want you to have 100% success rate. I want your PCs to enjoy every single time they travel. So to do that, understand and know exactly what you're trying to accomplish. That's the number one thing. The next big thing is, and this gets interesting, and it's something, again, that I missed very much in my early DM career, but you're going to have to make, I would highly encourage it to be a conscious decision. For a lot of people, it's a subconscious decision of choose how you deal moving from one place to another. And this seems like an odd concept, and we're getting to this in established precedent, but choose how you're regularly going to deal with this. Some DMs will just go, you know what? You travel from this town A to town B. It took you 3 days. Check off 3 days worth of food supplies, and you're at the new town. Congratulations. Some will make you play out every single night. Some will do movement based on a hex grid. There are different ways to do that. But what's going to happen is you're going to essentially choose a standard way that you move from place to place. And when something deviates from that, your PCs are going to recognize that something deviates from that. And you have to understand this, and you have to be prepared for it to happen. Where if you just move from point A to point B and say, you guys, it takes you a week and you get there, understand that if you go, all right, you travel 3 days and then you set up camp, let's role play camp. Immediately the PCs are going, what's happening? Because normally we just go from here to there. What's happening? Likewise, if you normally play out every single day, and you roll a random encounter tables and you do all of this, and then suddenly you just go, yeah, you're going through the barren desert and it takes you 3 days to get to the end of it, they might feel cheated out of that experience that they've come used to. Understand, you by default subconsciously will establish a standard way that you travel. I believe you should recognize it and understand what deviating from that method of travel is. And again, we're kind of talking about method of travel. I hope that's clear to most people. It's just whatever the normal way that you run events or don't run events occurs. Me personally, what I do is, you all know me by now, you know I am a narrative-based player, and I'm a narrative-based GM, and if we are moving from point A to point B, there is a story being told in between. And normally what I will do is I will take that travel to set up the story of what's happening at the destination. If we're going to talk about the ruthless king that's killing everyone, you're going to find his knights out there harassing the people. You're going to be set up. You're going to be brought into that story throughout the travel. And to me, travel is always part of the story. The reason we say all this is because it does something called, it establishes precedent. It establishes what your players are used to receiving from you in the environment, in their mind. A lot of times, consciously, they don't understand this, but subconsciously, it's there. That they realize what exactly is happening and when we deviate from it, because you have established precedent. When we travel, we fast travel. When we travel, there's a story being told. When we travel, we determine how many spaces we move on a hex grid. You are establishing that precedent within their mind. And likewise, they are going to follow that precedent. And here's where a lot of games can get bogged down if not handled well. Let's say we have a situation where the PCs are traveling from town A to town B. And you're sort of fast traveling them, and they're marching along, and you tell them, "Oh, you get attacked, sneak attacked by wolves or bandits or whatever it is. Your pick your poison there. You're attacked by poison darts. How about that? And then they go, well, how come we didn't notice them? And then you go, you didn't roll perception while you were traveling. Okay. You have now established the precedent that every single day, every single travel, they're going to roll for perception. Or whatever else the case may be. You tell them they're malnourished because they didn't say they cooked food at night. Whatever you do is going to establish precedent. And because travel is a common thing that happens in games, anytime you establish a precedent, your characters are going to continue to do it over and over and over. And I'll tell you, one of the common things that this happens, and then it starts really bogging down games, especially within the fantasy genre, setting up watch at night. Okay, what order are you all taking watch around the campfire while we all sleep? It's going to be you, 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 and you. And that way you determine at what point the random encounter occurs. Well, now every single night of the campaign, your players are going to go through this ritual of setting up watch. Are you fine with that? Do they enjoy it? I'm not saying anything is necessarily good or bad. But what I'm saying is, if you do it once, you're going to establish it forever, especially when you punish the party for not doing it, in the case of a sneak attack or a bandit comes in and steals items from the group. Once you do it once, you establish it in all similar situations, and all travel is going to be seen as that similar situation. It is definitely an area to be careful of, that when you do something, know what you're establishing. Okay, now we get into wonderful little opinions here. And my next point I have written out here in front of me is, do not play out the day-to-day. Now, again, there are different opinions. There's different opinions on this within this panel, and that's fine. My concern is when you play out the day-to-day, as in, this day we traveled X number of miles, and then we set up camp. And next day we traveled up X number of miles, and we fought this, and so on down the line. What you are doing is you are making your tabletop time mundane. You are taking what could be interesting, what could be driving towards the story, and you are making it mundane play. Actually, it is a type of fun. It is that submission type of fun, is what that is. And simulationists really, really love it. But it is engaging the submission type of fun, the mental activity, low-level mental activity. And there are some people that enjoy it, but especially as more and more I see people post their 8 types of fun, you keep seeing regularly submission is towards the bottom of that, and it's because it is hard to make good and engaging in a tabletop. Especially if they know, all right, I've got my 1 perception roll I got to do. I'm taking 3rd watch at night, next day. My perception roll, 3rd watch at night, next day. Now, again, I'm not saying there are not good and bad ways to do this. Malik, I'm sure you do a wonderful job doing it. I'm sure there are other DMs out there that do a wonderful job. But it is something to understand and be wary of. That if you are going to actively choose to play out the day-to-day and do the simulation-style play, you can run into this issue of it is engaging submission. And a lot of tabletop players do not like submission and do not engage with it heavily, would rather be doing something more significant to the story. And this comes down to one of my core concepts, which is not just for travel. This applies to a lot of different concepts within tabletop. And that is, do not try and make the mundane interesting. Cut the mundane, keep the interesting interesting. Now, again, there are simulationist style players that really like it, and this is blasphemous to them. I understand that. But I feel the majority of players do not want to deal with the mundane, because ultimately it's fun once. And so again, not just in travel, I'll give you an example. Going into town and bartering for, I'm going to sell the supplies that I got along the road. And I've got the rusty beat up sword, I've got the 3 apples, I've got the powder of hair growth, whatever items that you have, and you're going into town to barter with it. It is fun the first time you get a role play out of barter situation of coin and everyone here is really hairy, we don't need the hair growth thing. It's fun. But when you do it the second time, it's like, okay, can we just get to the coin? And when you do it the third time, you go, you're trying to make the mundane interesting. Things that are not connected to the plot, things that are not connected to types of fun, you are trying to take and make that an interesting activity as opposed to just cutting it. Again, when I deal with haggling in my games, I don't role play it out. You know what I tell people? I go, there's the price list. That this guy is selling at 80% under the price list. That's what he'll give you. Sell whatever you want, buy whatever you want, let me know when you're done. We'll continue the story. Cut it out completely. Likewise, travel. A day of travel that happens where nothing interesting occurs, we're going past that. I actually generally play, if I'm not doing direct story, I will go, and it took you 3 months to get to the Northern Pass, and now we're at the Northern Pass. And that's how I handle it, just wipe clean. If it's not directly part of the story that I can tell that's going to connect all the way up into our finale. If it's not part of that, if everything I do at the table is not building up to that, it's unnecessary, it's mundane, I feel it should be cut. Keep it focused on what is good and interesting. You have a limited amount of time with the players. You have a limited amount of time at the table. You want to make everything as interesting as possible. Do not try and sit there and make the mundane interesting, because you can do it, but you're going to be pulling at strings as opposed to cutting, reducing that time, taking all right, here's the mundane bookkeeping, let's get rid of that, and just fill the time with interesting stuff that happens. Do not try and make the mundane interesting. So those are the basic things to understand when we are moving from place to place. There needs to be something, a dedicated focus in what you're doing and how to deal with it. Now, this leads to an interesting situation. In that, where a lot of people get tripped up on this, is if we just cut out all of the mundane, then how do we show the passage of time? It doesn't. If you just told me it took 3 months to get to the Northern Pass, it doesn't feel like it took me 3 months to get to the Northern Pass. You're cheating me of the experience, Jim. I hear you all yelling at me, you simulationists. But the thing is, passage of time is a really interesting concept. And honestly, some of the best people that deal with this are writers and authors. I personally am a big fan of Stephen King. I'm reading the Dark Tower series right now, actually, while I was down on vacation. And it's really getting to look at it and see some of the interesting tricks of how to do it. But there is a certain way that we as humans understand the passage of time. And the first thing I'm going to say about from tabletop, from running a game, don't worry about the passage of time. If you're doing everything else correctly, they will feel like time has passed. We see passage of time as events that occur. So, for instance, I drove down last week to North Carolina from Cincinnati, Ohio. That's 11 hours there and back. It is a long period of time stuck in a car listening to the same 8 CDs over and over and over again. And then we'll talk about my music taste later. But what my brain actually remembers is not 11 hours of boredom. It remembers a couple key events. It remembers when we go over the bridge to North Carolina and I smell that sea salt that's in the air. It grabs me. I understand it. I get it. I remember that part. I remember stopping at Subway, and the guy behind the counter, as soon as I walked in the door, says, "Do you know that over 9,000 thing from the internet?" And my eyes lit up because, oh, we were about to have an event. We were about to have a real-life encounter, and that's a story for another day. A true story, as a matter of fact. But that's what my brain remembers. It doesn't remember 11 hours of boredom, because nothing happened. Our brain does not process that. What it processes is events occurring. Another form of media that is really clear about this is movies. Have you ever seen a movie infer the passage of time by dedicating more screen time to show it? You haven't. You don't get the passage of time by watching a person walk through the desert for more period of time. You don't get it. That's not how our brain works. That's not what they show. What they show is events. If we're going to do around the world in 80 days, we see them getting in hot air balloons. We see them crashing in hot air balloons. We see them getting old-timey cars. We see them getting traffic jams. We register events as the passage of time within our minds. And this is why I said earlier, beware about the submission style of fun within your travel. Because the submission style of fun is not something that stands out in your memory. It's something that sits in the back. It's something to do at the time, but does not stick with you to the table forward from there. Understand what you're doing, what you're trying to engage. So when we say the passage of events, how do we determine time? You have things happen while they are traveling. And the more events that occur, the more time will feel like it passed. That's the magic trick. That's the whole kit and caboodle of how you make time pass. You don't make them roll out every single dice for every single day, and well, you travel, this many squares and you're here now, and you travel this many squares and you're here now. In their mind, it all goes away. What they remember is the encounters, the attacks, the people that they meet, the plot items that they learn. They remember the events. So to show passage of time, you have to show more and more events happening. That's the whole key. And events really trick the mind, especially within the passage of time. To give you a couple examples, in a campaign right now, playing Swords and Wizardry, we've been playing for about 3 months. We're fairly regular. We've probably done 9 or 10 play sessions at this point. It feels like a whole world of things have happened in this campaign. I mean, just we've changed power. We stripped the mayor. We've taken control of the city. We're dealing with diplomacy in the whole kingdom. We're doing a massive amount of things. And just a couple weeks ago, we started going through our heads. We're like, only 4 in-game days have happened so far. 4 days. But yet, within our minds, until we actually broke it down to logic, it was, you could have told me at some point in that campaign, if we said, oh yeah, and 3 months went forward while you rebuild the city, would have felt perfectly real. Because of the number of events that occurred. That's what our mind remembers. And if there's one thing to take away from this workshop, that's it. Passage of time is done by events. This took me forever to figure out. Another great tale, I didn't get a chance to tell the story in the finale section, but I'm a big fan of, there was a video game that came out for the PlayStation 1 called Metal Gear Solid. Metal Gear Solid is close to a perfect narrative game. It's amazing. I will accept no one booing this story. It does finales well. It does characters well. It is just a laundry. Hideo Kojima has a laundry list of perfection, although putting everything together gets wonky sometimes. But interestingly enough, the first Metal Gear Solid, the one on the PS1, a whole bunch of stuff happens. It takes place over 18 hours. If you remember the narrative that everyone skips at the beginning when you're swimming into the base, the whole thing takes place over 18 hours. Again, it feels like a whole world of events has occurred. So within our tabletop, within our games and traveling from place to place, if you want to make it feel like an amount of time has passed, you have to give them stuff to do. Now, what normally happens when we give them stuff to do is we roll random encounters or we do whatever, which have their pros and cons. But the important thing you want to know is you want to have intelligent things for them to do that their brain is going to be engaged with, anchor with, and remember. So, similar events that they're going to have whenever they get to their town, you need to play those out as they're going through it. There needs to be stuff for them to do. And it's what I said earlier of you need to understand why they are traveling. You need to have that clear picture of why they are moving from place to place. Yeah, so within the passage of time, let me toss it out to Toast. Actually, we've talked about a couple of these different kind of concepts here. What do you feel as far as have you dealt with the passage of time and getting players to understand and feel it? Do you just try to ignore it? What ways have you dealt with that in the past?
All right. Well, in my games, it's in the future, so there's a lot of cars, and they drive within the state. So it's only a few hours, but I try to describe like what they see out the window, what they smell, what they sort of, might be feeling. I ask what games they play to pass the time in the car. I've played in games where we moved basically like 2 months. We sort of judge the passage of time by my character crafting an item for another player. So we sort of worked around with that. But most of the time it's the days sort of go. It's only like a maximum of 3 days to travel between most places because we're hopping planes a lot. So that's sort of.
Well, let me ask you with that, because honestly, I don't see any difference between hopping planes, driving cars, and walking down a road. I don't see any difference at all from how we engage that at the tabletop when you are moving, your characters, or you're playing a future world or whatever it is that you're doing, and your characters are driving cars from point A to point B, or flying planes from point A to point B. Do you just have, it happens, you spent, a day and a half in the airport and you're there, you drove 6 hours and you're at the next town. What do you do, or do you try and throw things at them?
One of my favorite things I like to throw down is shit breaks down a lot. That's one of my favorite things to do. Damn newfound turtle technology! Oh, breaking down. I like to break things down a lot. I like it when things break down. I have a lot of characters that build or repair things, so that's sort of engages me a little bit. More chance to tactile to roll the dice or whatever.
And to give you one last follow-up question, how important would you say you feel that the characters need to understand of time passages to your campaign? Do you feel that your characters have to understand time passed, or are you fine going, 3 days past? And I will say there is no right answer to this question.
Sometimes I'd like to sort of, if it's a long time, like 3 months or something, I want my players to feel that. But if it's a couple days, like they can imagine that. Sort of describe a little bit how stuff changes, and hopefully they can sort of make it feel like that, like just a few days have passed.
Okay, all right, nice, easy, middle of the road answer. I'll take it. No, I mean it's one of the things that you have to decide as a GM. And again, you don't necessarily need to go one way or another, but you need to understand what you're doing, the precedent you're establishing, and what you're trying to get from your players. Again, it is perfectly fine if you fast forward 3 months. It's perfectly fine if you want to play out every single day, but you need to understand there are pros and cons, there's types of fun you're engaging and not engaging with each of these things, and to understand how much time it is monopolizing at your table, and are people enjoying it, or are you just trying to make it long because you feel like that should take long for the passage of time. That's about the only thing I say is the wrong answer. Do not just make it last long. Okay, well, if you're going to travel for 2 weeks across the desert, we need to spend at least an hour at the table dealing with it, so that way it feels like something happened. That's the only wrong answer. You might actually spend 2 play sessions going through it, but the fact is, it's not about how much time you spend doing it. It's about the events that occur while it's happening. And we're going to talk more specifically about events here in a little bit, but we're going to go into talking more specifically now about dealing with sandboxes and dealing with about that discovery type of fun. So we're going to get into a little bit sandboxes here. I know we've got a couple heavy sandbox players. Let me just say, we'll start actually with Malik. Again, I know you're a sandbox player. You've been sitting there wonderfully silent while I've been talking. How do you sort of set up your sandbox world as far as, do you, before you start a campaign or during the campaign, do you set up, here's the 5 different towns on the continent? Do you make it up as your characters go along? What do you kind of set up for your campaign?
Well, it's actually kind of a combination of both. I have a general overlay of where different towns, and I set up the geography, basically. And after that, as things go along, I set up just basic descriptions of people that they can encounter, that my players can encounter in villages, and potential quest opportunities. Like, I know you don't like the word quest, but like the potential story-driven opportunities to go through maybe a story arc or create an idea through that. But it's mostly, the geography is mostly established. It's just a matter of the players moving through it.
Okay, and when you set that up, do you have, in other words, say, town A is, and I know you said you use hex maps, but, town A is, whatever, 12 spaces from town B, and do you have all of that charted out in advance, or do you kind of go throughout? I'm just trying to get a good idea of what exactly you do for prep work.
Well, actually, you pretty much just named it there in terms of traveling. I have a hex system set up for the world, and each hex represents either a day, 2 days, or 3 days, depending on the type of terrain that the players have to move through. And I just calculate that. I tell them how much it would cost, wagon ride-wise or like seafaring-wise, and then I do the quick math, and then we can just go through that.
Okay. All right. Wonderful. Patrick, you also told me that you run sandbox campaigns or have in the past. How do you sort of set up your sandbox campaign and your world?
I really like to go from the ground up on this one, focusing first on what kind of time period I want to run in, as well as the world's mythology and what kind of gods or mystical creatures there are, because I find that really heavily influences how cities work and like just the world overall. From there, I like to get a rough drawing of a map, place towns and major cities where they would logically be placed, and then from there, really focus on cultures and around the major cities that the PCs will see, as well as some major economy points. Because truthfully, I believe economy is the blood of a nation. And
okay. I'll go out on a limb and guess that you are a simulationist style player. Would I be correct in that?
No, actually, I agree a lot with what you were saying earlier. I perfectly agree that the mundane can be cut and ignored a lot from the majority of RPGs, and you should really focus on the fantastical.
Okay, well that's interesting and not what I expected. So when we get to more of the open forum, it'll be an interesting discussion. But yeah, thank you for that insight. What we're looking at and sort of where I'm going with all of this is Sandbox is its own sort of unique world. And one of the things I've sort of not said for a long period of time, and people for some reason have really think I'm completely in the opposite direction. When I GM, I almost exclusively run Sandbox campaigns. Yeah, everyone seems to think for some reason I'm a linear player, probably because I talk so much about plot. I almost exclusively run sandbox-style campaigns. Now, I do what I call limited sandbox of it. It's normally a town, some geographical features, and sort of the surrounding area, so it's not an entire world. But I run sandbox campaigns. And the reason being is because it gives a little extra freedom within a political campaign. It makes it a little bit easier. But I feel that sandbox campaigns give a deeper breathing world to your players than a linear campaign can. So when you're setting up your sandbox campaign, a lot of people do, well, everyone has sort of their own different rituals. Some people plan out everything, sort of like what Patrick was telling us of, here's the geography, here's the people, here's the infrastructure, here's, the whole 9 yards. Malik is similar in that he sets up a hex grid map and says, this is that far from there, and it has everything laid out that way. I do things a little bit differently in that I do very basic. I have normally my own little hand-drawn map. Not that I show players, it's just for my own reference. And I just go, it is this long of a travel from the mountains back to the city. It'll take you half a day's walk to get from the foothills of the mountain back to the city. No distance, no nothing like that. That's how long it takes, if you're curious to know. And then as they're going, events will happen. Because if they're going to the mountains, there should have been a reason they're going to the mountains that's tied into my plot. But one of the things that you're looking for when you're setting up your sandbox is, again, keeping things interesting, keeping things good and monopolizing your time at the table. You don't just want to give them big, huge tracts of land to follow, and hopefully they'll run into something. This is essentially, it is a lot of people set up this way, and what they're subconsciously trying to do is engage the discovery type of fun, which this kind of does if done correctly. But if done incorrectly, all it does is bore and distract and lose interest in your players. You have to understand when they are going out to travel, you are giving them a specific reason, moving from point A to point B intentionally, engaging the discovery type of fun, or engaging the plot. Which are they doing? And just exploration alone does not meet discovery. We're going to talk specifically about how you engage that type of discovery, but just exploration alone doesn't. And when you make a fully fleshed out world and say you can go any direction, my personal golden rule as a GM is if you give the players a choice, you must be fine with them choosing any option. By making a fully fleshed out world, you are saying you have permission to walk in 360 degrees any direction you want for as long as you want. You have to be okay with them walking that direction in any direction for as long as they want. You have given them that choice. So when you are planning out your sandbox campaign and how you do maps, have that in your head. Have that thought of, if they decide to do this because I've given them the freedom, if I take back the freedom, I break the trust. I've given them the freedom. Am I okay with it? Do I have things designed? Will it be interesting? And if the answer to any of that is no, you really need to look and reconsider how you're running it, because you don't want bored players from their own choices. Choices should always bring interesting things, and you should always be okay with any choice that they make. So then we get to what we're actually talking about here, discovery. How do we engage that type of discovery through exploration? Because there are also other ways to engage that type of discovery. Here's the interesting thing about discovery. Discovery enjoyment comes from when players engage with things on their periphery. I'll say that one more time. Discovery enjoyment comes from when players engage with things on their periphery. What I mean by that, I'm going to give you a situation. You all are a group of PCs. You're coming through the town, you're coming to the town. You're walking down the path, and you start seeing all these old ancient ruins. You see this giant monolithic tower that's crumbling up above. You see a bridge over a small river to your right-hand side, and you see this old trading post with this old man with crooked teeth sitting ahead of you. What the discovery player wants to do, and where he gets enjoyment, is he goes in his mind, well, he set up this scene. What's on the other side of that bridge? He said it's a bridge of a river. I know what's on this side of it. What's on the other side of the bridge? That's what a discovery player gets enjoyment from. Not walking out and finding the bridge or finding these three things. That does not actually give him enjoyment. What he gets enjoyment from is going, I know this is here. Everyone knows this is here. What are the things other people aren't looking at? What is at the point of that crumbling tower that I have to spend a day getting ropes and pulleys to try and scale? Maybe there's an old rune up there. What's on the other side of that bridge? That's what engages discovery players. So, with an exploration of the world, what you are actually not giving them is you travel, 5 hex maps forward and you come across a giant tower. Yeah, people will be interested in it, people will be engaged, but that's actually not engaging discovery. It is when you give them an environment, you give them a setting, and then they explore it deeper than what you gave them. They must find it on their own. It can't just be handed to them. And this is, it's a small distinction. It is a thin line, but it is an important one to understand of there is a difference between walking and finding a bridge in the middle of nowhere over no water, and walking in and seeing these 3 monuments and letting them on their own go, what's on the other side of the bridge? So when in travel, when you're trying to engage that type of discovery, what you are not doing is putting things directly in front of them. And actually, I'm going to take that statement back. You are putting things directly in front of them for the purpose of them to then engage what's on the periphery of their mind. What they see on the borders that they can just barely see. They want to discover what others have not discovered. That is how you enjoy discovery fun. If you're going to do your big map, if you're going to do your thought-out map, you want to add these stuff, again, with the knowledge of stumbling across the giant tower is interesting, but not engaging discovery. Allowing them to find things on their own, allowing them to hear the rumors and go out searching for the tower and then to find it is discovery. These types of things are interesting, but what you have to understand is just dropping things in front of them as they explore the wilderness does not tickle that discovery, and even discovery players will get bored if you continue to do it. It's a really interesting concept, but it's one to really understand. So when you're doing a sandbox, if you're doing heavy maps, if you're setting up these types of maps, understand this. Build this into what you're doing. Build things to allow them to discover on their own. And again, walking into an unknown area and there's this thing is actually not discovery. It's finding something and then digging deeper. That's discovery, and that's what you want to give them. You can do it very well with the big sandbox. You can do it very well with the way that Malik sets up his world with a grid-based system and everything's here. You can engage in all of that. The big core thing to understand, is do it intentionally. Because you might do it unintentionally, maybe 50% of the time. But the other 50% of the time, you are going to be boring your players. All right, a note real quick about realism, because this is one of the other things that gets thrown around in Discovery here. Realism is an interesting concept within tabletop. I personally abhor realism. I try to escape it all the time. That's why I'm wearing a Hawaiian shirt in Cincinnati while it's storming outside, because I still want to be on the beach. Realism is terrible. Now, within travel and within tabletop, when you are dealing with this kind of stuff, one of the common things that happens is people want it to be realistic. I hate when people want to try, I shouldn't use the word hate, but I do. I hate when people want things to try and be realistic, because realistic is not fun. Realistic is not in my 8 kinds of fun. It doesn't exist anywhere in there. Yes, people do enjoy it. Some people need it as part of their immersion into fantasy, but the fact is, everything that we do, once you dig deep enough, doesn't pass the test of realism. Realism is boring. Realism doesn't work. Even when you're getting into the future, the sci-fi fantasy, once you really start breaking the stuff down, none of it really works that well. The currency systems don't work. There's just rife with problems as you understand specific areas within it. So this concept that it needs to be realistic. So for instance, and again, this is nothing against Malik. This is just sort of with that style of setting up a grid, and it takes a number of distance. And I know Malik, and he's a good GM, and he's very thorough with this stuff. And I assume probably certain squares take more distance to pass. But if I'm going to climb over a mountain range in a hex-based grid, realistically, certain paths might take me 2 days, certain paths might take me 2 weeks that are all encompassed in that grid. So to say it is difficult terrain, takes twice the movement, isn't realistic at all. It's actually less realistic than what I do, which is when I tell my player, well, you can walk up this path, it'll take you 2 days, you can walk all the way around the corner, it'll take you a week, or you can try and climb it yourself, and you're probably going to be about half a week, 3-4 days to do it, but it's dangerous. That's actually more realistic than your hex-based system. Now, it's not necessarily what you're going for. And that's the big thing I want to point out. When we get into this realism within our fantasy, I personally don't like it. I think it's dangerous behavior to try and make something happen because it's realistic. Because you know what's really realistic? We get on the path and we walk to town and nothing happens. That's realism. You read any fantasy book, you watch any movie, you watch any story, you play at most game tables. If there was a fork at the road and the players decide to go to the right fork, that is not the sunshine and daffodils skip down the golden brick trail. That is where something will happen, something interesting, something probably aggressive to them. That's not realistic. That doesn't happen. We had herds of people travel from the East Coast to the West Coast in the gold rush. They were not constantly being attacked by wolves, despite 6 months of travel. They just kind of got there. They dealt with some snow. They got with some weather. Yeah, bad things happen, but the fact is like 95% of people made it with little issue. That's realism. So to try and engage something through realism is a dangerous practice. So the last thing I wanted to get into is we've talked about all the different things and having events happen while you are traveling. So I want to talk a little bit about these certain events. And Malik, you had mentioned that you do rolling on encounter tables and doing random encounters. How do you normally use random encounters? How frequently do you use them, and sort of how exactly do you do it?
Well, I mostly results in a GM roll, and it doesn't always happen so much as it is an every now and then sort of thing. But it's pretty arbitrary. I just kind of roll it, and the encounter doesn't always mean that you're going to be attacked or you're going to have to deal with some type of threat. It could also be very like with the centaurs, for example. They weren't hostile, but it was something that was there that you kind of came across, which now that you mentioned, you're definitely starting to change my mind on quite a few things, and what you're saying makes a lot of sense. And you flatter me too much. I'm not a good GM. So
we're all good GMs. GMs are nothing if they don't have an ego, right? No, but by all means, and I ask because I want to know. There's different ways to handle things. I personally don't do random encounters. Not saying random encounters are wrong, but I say this back in the encounter workshop, I believe that every encounter, because it monopolizes a certain amount of time, should be core and relevant to what's happening. And yes, you can make random encounters relevant and interesting, and you can tie them in there. Actually, matter of fact, specifically to Malik, I've seen one of his play sessions, and actually his campaign, I think, started that way with essentially what was a random encounter that then turned into a story, and it worked very, very well. My concern with random encounters is that you're 50-50. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. And as a GM, I'm always trying to be 100%. I want them to have fun every single time. I want it to be engaging every single time. So I caution random encounters. But there are ways to do it very, very well. And Malik, he said a little bit about it. One of the big things people miss when they do random encounters is you can do random encounters. They don't all have to be combat. You can have a random encounter with a traveling caravan of gypsies that are selling stuff. You can have a social random encounter. It changes it up. It spices it up. It gives something different that's happening. There's nothing wrong necessarily with the standard random encounter, the wolves attacking, the thieves attacking, what have you. But if you do it all the time, it gets boring. You start dropping in that submission style of fun. The mind starts ignoring it. Understand that you can do anything you want with these random encounters. An encounter is just solely something happening. Could be combat, could be social, could be anything you want, could be natural disaster. Understand that there is multiple ways to do it. Again, nothing wrong with a random encounter, but if you're giving your PCs the exact same thing every single time, it's not good. One of the other things I want to talk about as far as travel events that happen frequently, the campfire scene. Anyone who's played D&D or Pathfinder, I would wager to bet 98% of you, even if you've only been playing for less than 6 months, have been at a campfire with all of your other PCs talking while you're on the road. Almost every single person does this. And again, there's nothing wrong with the campfire scene, but where it becomes an issue, because it gives an opportunity to role play, it gives an opportunity for people to talk, but what it is it's a space filler. A random encounter might happen, but that's a random encounter. The camp scene that happens is I'm going to allow my players to make their own fun. That's what you're doing. You're allowing PC to PC interaction, something that I think should happen in a campaign, something that I think is good, but something that you should do knowing that you're going into it. I do not like starting out a campaign that way, of PCs that don't know or barely know each other, sitting around a campfire talking to get to know each other, because they don't have anything to talk about. If they're in the middle of a big engaging plot, if they're rushing to catch someone, if they're fleeing from escape, they have things to discuss. And then there's a good time for a campfire scene. Let them talk it out. Let them do it. They have to have something to engage with first. If they do not have that thing to engage with, then they're just going to sit around and go, well, I guess we're going to set up watch. And nothing happened. No passage of time happened because no event happened. The other thing with campfire scenes is they kind of get reused like really, really frequently. So you want to avoid doing that. You want to give them a campfire scene when they have time to or something to talk about. It needs to be an event. If you're going to give it time at the table, it needs to be an event. You have to give that to them. You do not want to go, all right, You just had a camp scene in the last play session. You all have more time to talk. And they go, well, we kind of talked about the dragon. We kind of talked about the bad guy. You told me your howling visions of your dead mother. Guess more howling visions of your dead mother? That's what you end up with if you overuse something. You don't want to do that. You want to use it when it's appropriate and not use it when it's inappropriate, and understand what you're doing going into it. One of the last ones I want to talk about, and then we'll get, I'll ask to the panel if they have any ideas for sort of events that they use while traveling. This isn't necessarily an event, but sort of it's a larger, what I call, travel event. And it came from a post I saw on one of the forums in the last couple weeks. But it's the dealing with, like, lost in a desert. And you're moving around, and time's passing, and you're using up resources and this kind of thing. And the GM was having a lot of real difficulty with it. And one of the other sort of tools that you can use is time is something you control as the GM. It's yours. You get to determine how quickly your desert passage. I did a desert lost scene when I was talking with people, and they were wandering through the desert, and, you know, it was sort of typical things. They were getting attacked and all of that, and they were starting to get dehydrated. They were running out of supplies, and one of the things as I was narrating to them, it'd go, you know, you break camp the next day, you set forward on your path east, minutes, hours, days, maybe weeks pass, and you're traveling, and you just completely break down time. You no longer give them a basic of reference. They don't know how long they've been in the desert anymore. And it removes that feeling of safety from them. You yank that net away from them. Don't give them that to stand on. And you can control time, and you can distort time, and you can not tell them how much time has passed, because if you are dehydrated in the desert, these are the things you're going to forget. You're going to forget how many times you set up camp and broke down camp. If you try and play everything out day by day, you lose that tool. You lose that way to do it. So I just wanted to bring up that specifically. But let's see, Toast or Patrick, does anyone have any sort of events that they have done, travel events outside of a random encounters or campfires, anything like that?
This is actually a random event, but it's my favorite random event. You might remember a few weeks ago the dire honey badger.
Well, go ahead and tell the story.
I was covering for a guy, and he liked to do the hex square and random encounters. It was very loose definition of sort of encounters. So it's like animals, 2 animals. I'm like, you know what? I want to make this memorable and fun. So I threw a lot of badgers at people, because he'd been using just like 1 or 2 really tough guys, and I wanted to throw a lot of weak guys at him. So as sort of a leader or a lieutenant or a boss for all these badgers, I gave a dire honey badger. When the badgers pretty much almost wiped the party, the honey badger did its own thing. It did what it wanted. It didn't care.
Perhaps would you say the honey badger didn't care?
Yes, it just did not care.
Wonderful. And what you did there, real quick, is you took what they were used to. They were getting the same thing over and over again, and it sounded like they were getting bored, and you gave them something different, and they engaged with it. And that's what they need, because if they're doing the same thing over and over again, they're not engaging. They're not seeing as different events. They're not seeing as passage of time, and they're not having fun, or they might not be having fun. Giving them something different lets them give something to sink into. Patrick, it looked like you had another event as well.
Yeah, I got one. One I did a while back as a DM that I found my players really enjoyed was there was a travel through a forest, and I made the players do perception checks to spot like this vibrant white tiger-like creature with like antlers, and looked very majestic and just radiated beauty. And so of course the players saw it, and they wanted to interact with it. It was a very majestic creature, and so they tried to use like handle animal or sneak to get up close. And of course, one player fails the check, alerts the beast, and it just kind of prances off. At which point the players like feel a rustling or hear a rustling from the side, and a big burly man decked out in fur kind of charges towards them and like grabs one of the nearest party member by the collar and says, "I've been tracking that beast for weeks. Do you know how much I bargained off that beast's pelt for?" And just like tearing the pieces just limb for limb, just verbally, and just like After like just spouting off in rage for a little bit, he kind of says, "If I can't catch that beast, I'm hunting you next," and just storms off after an argument with the players, creating a rather notable NPC.
And that's a good event to have with travel, because you're combining combat or possible combat, you're combining social that's involved with it, as well as tying into the story. And that's pretty much everything I've been saying from the get-go. If you're going to do events while travel, they have to be unique and interesting. You would not want to play a campaign where you did the same type of plot over and over again. You would get boring narrative-wise. Same thing when you're traveling, you don't want to have the same types of events hit over and over again. We just have a minute or two left. Did anyone have any sort of last questions before we wrap up our workshop here?
One of my favorite encounters that I haven't actually used yet is quite literally running over a plot device.
Elaborate on that for us.
Okay, basically my PCs have been sort of stumbling through this, totally missing all these points. I hope none of them are watching. It's Shadowrun, and basically they hadn't figured out over the course of 2 months of playing that there's a bug infestation in the city sort of bubbling up, and if you don't know anything about Shadowrun, bugs are really bad news. So basically they're going to be driving towards their destination to drop off the cargo that they stole, and they're literally going to run over a bug-infested human.
Nice, and I like that. You're using travel to tie in and engage them into plot, and I believe that is the correct and proper thing to do. Again, if there's a couple pieces of advice that I would give you, about travel, is make it relevant to what's going on. Because if it's not relevant to what's going on, then you're not interesting your players. You're not building up to your finale. You're not going to give them that great conclusion. Traveling is a set piece. There it is, just like a big fight at the city gates. Traveling should be a set piece. Okay, and with that, we are out of time. It has been a wonderful workshop. Of course, this has been Time, Travel, and Discovery. We will have future workshops up and coming. I encourage everyone to follow us, of course, on Roll20, our live community that's there in our forums, on Facebook, on Twitter, all of our various different social media that we're on. We've got a couple big projects that are rolling out soon that we'll be really, really excited for. But it has been a wonderful time at the table. I hope you all learned something, and have a wonderful evening.